I never thought my own son would stand in my kitchen, look me in the eye, and say, "Mum, the house doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to all of us." But my son Callum did. He said it quietly, almost gently, the way you tell someone difficult news you've rehearsed too many times. His wife Diane stood behind him, with her arms folded, nodding slightly, as if she had coached every word. And in that moment, standing beside the counter where I had made 1,000 breakfasts, where my late husband Gordon had drunk his coffee every morning for 31 years, I felt something cold and certain settle inside me. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like this story and subscribe if you if you believe a mother's love should never be mistaken for surrender. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child tried to quietly take what you had spent a lifetime building? I'd love to know where you're watching from too. The house on Ridgecrest Drive in Kitchener had never been grand. 3 bedrooms, a narrow lot, a back garden that always threatened to go wild if I turned my attention away for even a week. But Gordon and I had chosen it precisely because it was manageable. We were practical people. Gordon worked as a civil engineer for the region of Waterloo for almost 3 decades. I taught elementary school for 26 years, grade 3 for most of them. Small children who still believed the world was essentially kind. Between the two of us, we stretched every dollar carefully. We packed lunches, drove used cars, took our vacations to provincial parks rather than anywhere tropical. We did not do this because we had to, exactly. We did it because we had a plan. The plan was the house. Gordon used to say that owning your home outright, no mortgage, no lender, no conditions, was the closest thing to freedom a working person could achieve. He was not wrong. We paid off the mortgage 11 years before he died. I remember the afternoon we made the final payment. It was March, gray and cold, the kind of Ontario day that makes you wonder if winter will simply decide to stay permanently. We sat at this very kitchen table with cups of tea and the bank confirmation letter between us, and Gordon said, "Well, Marg." He always called me Marg, not Margaret, not Maggie, just Marg. "Well, Marg, nobody can take this from us now." I pressed my palm flat against the letter. Nobody, I agreed. Our son Callum was 12 years old then. He was doing homework at the dining room table, probably complaining about it, and he had no idea that the quiet moment happening in the kitchen would matter as much as it eventually did. Callum grew up in this house the way most children grow up in homes. Their parents loved too much to ever explain properly. He took it for granted in the way children take granted everything given to them before they understand effort. He knew which step on the staircase creaked. He knew the back door stuck in humidity. He knew that the maple tree in the front yard dropped helicopters every spring and that his father swept them into neat piles while I raked the flower beds. He knew all the small physical facts of the house without knowing what the house had cost. Not in dollars, though that mattered. In years. In choices. In evenings spent calculating instead of relaxing. In quiet sacrifices we made without announcement, because that was simply what parents did. Callum was a good boy, mostly. A little impatient, a little ambitious, always certain he had identified the most efficient route between any 2 points. Even as a teenager, he had that quality. He did not waste energy on sentimentality if he could help it. Gordon admired it, actually. Said it would serve him well in business. And for a long time, it did. He met Diane Beaumont at university in Guelph. She was sharp and confident, studying finance, the kind of young woman who always had a plan ready before anyone else in the room had finished reading the question. I wanted to like her. I tried. In the early years, I told myself that what I felt was simply the ordinary adjustment a mother makes when her son chooses someone else to be his primary person. I told myself that Diane's habit of evaluating everything, every neighborhood, every rest, every gathering, was simply thoroughness, a professional habit. But Gordon saw something else. He told me once, not long before his diagnosis, that he found Diane difficult to read. "She's always measuring something," he said. We were sitting on the back porch. It was a summer evening. The neighbors' children were shouting in the yard next door. Fireflies were beginning to show in the dusk. And I can never tell what the tape measure is for. I did not answer him then. I wish now that I had. Gordon was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in November of the year he turned 67. The diagnosis arrived the way those diagnoses always do. Suddenly, and then all at once, as if the illness had been waiting politely just outside the door and had finally decided to stop waiting. Within 6 months, he was spending most of his days in the recliner by the living room window. He liked watching the bird feeder he had installed years earlier. He liked the chickadees especially. He used to keep a running tally in a small notebook on the side table. Callum visited when he could. Diane came with him sometimes not. There were always reasonable explanations. Her hours were demanding. They had bought a new townhouse in Burlington, and it required constant attention. Traffic on the 401 was terrible. All true, probably. And yet, I learned to take care of Gordon the way you learn most things late in life. Without a manual, with a great deal of trial and error, and with the quiet knowledge that there was no one else. Our neighbor Helen Tran, who had lived 2 doors down for 16 years, and brought soups and sat with me through the worst evenings, once said, "You know what surprises me most, Margaret? You never ask for anything." I told her I didn't know who to ask. She gave me a look over her reading glasses that I have thought about many times since. 2 weeks before Gordon died, he asked me to call our family lawyer. His name was Peter Okafor. He had handled our wills, our property documents, everything, for 15 years. Gordon had called him himself the previous spring, during a period when he was still mobile, and his mind was absolutely clear. And whatever conversation they had, I was not part of it. Gordon only told me afterward that he had made some arrangements. "What kind of arrangements?" I asked. He was lying in the hospital bed we had rented for the main floor bedroom by then. The light from the window was thin. His hands, which had always been large and capable, looked different now. "Sensible ones," he said. "Don't sign anything about the house, Marg. Not without calling Peter first. Promise me." I thought he was being overly cautious. I thought grief had made him worried about things that didn't need worrying about. I said yes mostly to reassure him. "And don't let anyone rush you," he added, "no matter how they frame it." I asked him why he was saying these things. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know our son loves you," he said finally. "And I know he loves a good opportunity. And I'm not sure he always knows the difference." He died 10 days later. We buried him in December, in the small cemetery in Elmira, where his parents were also buried, which is the kind of detail that matters more than people expect. At the graveside, Callum stood very straight and did not cry. Diane held his arm. I stood a little apart from them. Helen held my hand. The first year without Gordon, I managed. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I had a pension from the school board, Gordon's survivor benefits, and the house paid off. I was not wealthy, but I was stable, and I had been taking care of myself and other people for 63 years. I knew how to be careful. I knew how to be alone without being undone by it. Callum called every Sunday. He and Diane came for Christmas and Easter. Things felt, if not warm, then at least functional. Then, in the spring of the second year, Callum called on a Tuesday, not Sunday. That alone made me pay attention. "Mum," he said. His voice was careful, rehearsed in a way I recognized from his childhood. The voice he used when he wanted something and had decided on his strategy before calling. "Diane and I have been talking. We're worried about you being in that house alone." I looked around the kitchen. It was mid-morning. The bird feeder was full. The dishes were done. "I manage fine," I said. "We know you think you do," he said. "But the house needs work, and you're not getting any younger. We thought, maybe it would make sense for us to come and stay for a while, help you figure things out." He said it so reasonably. Help you figure things out. As if I had stopped being able to figure things out, and simply hadn't noticed yet. I should have said no. I know that now. Gordon knew it before I did, which is why he said what he said. But I was lonely, and loneliness is its own kind of reasoning. And Callum was my son. Whatever complicated calculus existed between us, whatever things went unacknowledged, he was still the boy who had sat at my kitchen table doing homework. He was still mine. So I said yes. They arrived on a Saturday in April, with 2 carloads and a rented trailer. Diane organized everything with the quiet efficiency she brought to all undertakings. She had a list. She had a plan for every room. She walked through the house on the first day with a notepad, and I thought she was taking inventory of what needed repairing, which was generous of me. My granddaughter Lily was 12, tall for her age, with her grandfather's eyes and an unsettling habit of noticing everything. She sat beside me on the back porch that first afternoon while her parents directed the moving of furniture, and she said, "Grandma, are you actually happy we're here?" I told her of course I was. She looked at me the way children look at adults when they have decided the adult is being careful with the truth. The first few weeks were almost pleasant. Callum repaired the back step, which had been soft for 2 seasons. Diane organized the pantry, which I admit was overdue. Lily helped me in the garden. We ate dinner together most evenings. For a little while, the house had the noise in it that a house needs, and noise after silence can feel like mercy. But things began to shift. It started with small things, the way it always does. Diane moved the coffee maker to a different counter, because the new position made more sense for traffic flow. She replaced the kitchen curtains, the ones Gordon had helped me hang 12 years earlier, because they were dated. She told the cleaning service to come on Thursdays, instead of Mondays without asking me, because Mondays were better for her schedule. Each thing, taken separately, could be explained. Taken together, they told a different story. Then Callum suggested painting the living room. A more neutral tone, he said. More contemporary. He mentioned, almost in passing, that houses in Kitchener were selling quickly in the current market. He mentioned that the Hendersons 2 streets over had gotten a very strong price for a comparable property. He mentioned that older homes with good bones were particularly sought after. Good bones. Gordon had used those exact words when we first walked through the house. Hearing them from Callum's mouth felt like something being borrowed without permission. "I'm not planning to sell," I said. A small pause. "Of course not, Mum. I'm just saying the neighborhood is strong right now. It's good to know." But the conversation kept returning. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently, the way a dripping faucet returns to your attention, no matter how many other sounds are in a room. Our neighbor Helen noticed before I said anything to her. She waved me over one morning when I was getting the mail. Lily was at school. Callum and Diane were both inside. "Your daughter-in-law asked me something yesterday," Helen said. "Diane?" Helen nodded. She wanted to know what the Hendersons got for their place. I felt a small tightness in my chest. Helen continued, and she asked if I thought the value would go higher once the new transit corridor gets approved. She looked at me carefully. "Margaret, keep your eyes open." I told her I would. I drove home and sat in the driveway for 3 minutes before going inside. That evening, Callum made pasta and poured wine and talked about the neighborhood with a warmth that had not been in his voice before. He talked about the transit corridor. He talked about property tax assessments. He talked about renovation incentives available through the provincial government. I asked him directly, "Callum, why are you so interested in what this house is worth?" He looked at me with something that resembled patience. "Mum, I'm thinking ahead, that's all. Isn't that what you always told me to do?" Diane said nothing. She refilled her glass. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in the bedroom that Gordon and I had shared, and I listened to the house, and the house sounded different than it had 6 months ago. Not louder, just less mine. I found the document 3 weeks later. I was looking for a pen in the dining room, which Callum had turned into a workspace. A folder had slid partly off the table. I was not searching for anything, but the words at the top of the visible page stopped me. Property valuation and equity assessment. Residential. Below it, notes in Diane's handwriting, numbers I recognized as related to the house. Comparable sales, renovation cost estimates, return calculations, and in the margin, underlined, timeline, 8 to 12 months. I replaced the folder exactly as I had found it. That night, after Callum and Diane had gone upstairs, I went to the closet where I kept Gordon's documents. The metal lockbox was still on the top shelf, where it had always been. The key was under the lining of my jewelry box, exactly where Gordon had put it and told me never to move it. Inside the box was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Gordon's handwriting, Marg. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it for a long time before I opened it. His letter covered 3 pages. I will not quote it to you entirely, because some things belong only between a husband and wife. But the important parts I will share, because he wrote them specifically, so that I would share them if I needed to. He wrote, "If you are reading this, something has happened that has made you uncertain about the house. Trust that feeling. You have good instincts, Marg, even when you talk yourself out of them. I want to tell you something I did not tell you at the time, because I did not want to worry you. When I was still well enough to travel, I drove to Peter Okafor's office, and we spent most of a day reworking how the property is held. Peter will explain the details. What matters is this: the house cannot be sold, transferred, remortgaged, or touched in any legal way without your explicit written consent under independent legal review. No power of attorney can override this. I did this because I know that grief makes people vulnerable. And I know that certain people are better at recognizing an opportunity than they are at recognizing a wrong. This is not about Callum. I love our son, but I know who his wife is, and I know that love does not always prevent the people we love from doing things that hurt us. Call Peter. Don't wait. Don't explain to anyone why. Just call." I folded the letter and sat with it in my lap for a very long time. Then I called Peter Okafor. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me, given that it was past 9 o'clock. When I said my name, he'd said, "Margaret, Gordon told me you would call. I have been waiting." His voice was calm and steady, the kind of professional calm that only forms through years of sitting with people in difficult moments. "Can you come to my office tomorrow?" "Yes," I said. "Don't sign anything before then." "I won't." "And Margaret, don't tell them you're coming." Peter's office was in a low brick building near Victoria Park. I had been there twice before, for routine things. This time felt different. He met me at the door himself, which he had never done. Inside, he explained what Gordon had done. The property had been restructured into what Peter called a spousal life estate, with enhanced protections. Under this arrangement, I held the property absolutely during my lifetime. No one else could exercise any claim on it, initiate any transfer, or take any legal step regarding it without my direct and independent consent, confirmed with separate legal counsel. Any power of attorney granted after Gordon's death would be limited to personal care and routine finances, specifically excluded from property decisions. Peter showed me the documents. He showed me the specific clauses Gordon had insisted upon. Then he told me something else. "Callum called my office," he said. I went very still. "When?" 4 months ago, before they moved in. The air in the room felt different. What did he want? Peter looked at me with the careful steadiness of someone who has delivered difficult news many times. He asked whether there were any mechanisms for joint property management. He described it as planning for your eventual care needs. Peter paused. He was very polite about it. He said he was only thinking ahead. I thought about Callum's voice in the kitchen. "I'm thinking ahead. Isn't that what you always told me to do?" "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that the property arrangements were between you and me, and that I could not discuss them. And I told him that any attempt to involve himself in property decisions without your explicit participation would be something I would need to note." I nodded slowly. "He didn't call again," Peter added. That was the moment I understood that this had not been improvised. Callum and Diane had been planning before they arrived. The generous offer to come and help, the careful patience, the slow accumulated pressure. All of it had been calculated. Perhaps not cruelly. Perhaps they had told themselves it was reasonable, but it had been planned. Peter gave me instructions. Document everything. Keep copies of whatever paperwork came across the table. Don't confront them yet. And most importantly, let them believe they were still winning. I drove home in the late afternoon and sat in the driveway again. The maple tree at the front had just begun to bud. Gordon had planted it the year we moved in because he wanted the house to have shade eventually, even if he had to wait for it. He was always willing to wait for the right things. I went inside and made dinner. The family conversation happened 3 weeks later. Callum announced it on a Sunday afternoon. He said he and Diane had been thinking about practical matters and wanted to sit down together to make sure everyone was on the same page. He said it so reasonably that it almost sounded kind. We gathered in the living room. Callum on the sofa beside Diane, who had a folder on her lap. Lily in the armchair near the window, already looking uncomfortable. Me in Gordon's chair, which I had quietly moved back to its original position the previous week. Callum folded his hands. Mum, first of all, you know everything we do comes from a place of love. I have since learned that conversations beginning with that sentence rarely end well. He talked about aging. Gently, carefully, in the way people talk about something they have decided is already true. He talked about the responsibilities of managing a property. He talked about care needs and planning ahead, and the importance of not waiting until a crisis to make decisions. Diane opened the folder. Inside were documents. One was a financial power of attorney. A second was an agreement that would give Callum joint signing authority on property decisions in the event of incapacity or diminished decision-making ability. The phrasing was precise. Very precise. I looked at the documents and said nothing. Callum continued talking, and as he talked, I watched his face. I had known that face since before it was finished forming. I had kissed it when it was covered in fever, and held it when the world had been unkind to it. I knew every expression it made, and I could see that beneath the reasonable tone and the careful language, my son was frightened. Not of me, of something else, something underneath all of this that I did not yet fully understand. Lily was watching him too. She looked at me and then quickly away, but not before I caught something in her expression that told me she had already made up her mind about this meeting. I'd like to read these, I said, when Callum finished. Relief crossed Diane's face immediately. Too much relief. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll have Peter Okafor look them over. The relief vanished. Callum's jaw moved slightly. Mum, it's straightforward. You don't need to involve a lawyer for something between family. Peter has been our family lawyer for 15 years, I said. I think involving him is entirely appropriate. Diane said nothing, but she closed the folder. The meeting ended without resolution. Callum said we could talk more later. I said that sounded fine. Lily took the dishes to the kitchen and came back to sit beside me briefly before going upstairs. She didn't say anything. She just sat close. That was enough. Later that night, after the house was quiet, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. Come in, Lily. She appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, holding a glass of water as if she needed a reason to be there. Grandma, she said. Yes. She came and sat on the edge of the chair beside the window. For a moment, she just looked at her hands. They've been talking about this for a long time, she said finally. My heart slowed. Have they? She nodded. Not a question. A fact she had been carrying for a while. Dad talks on the phone a lot in the morning, she said. I wake up early. I hear things. What kinds of things? She was quiet. Then, carefully, he said that once the papers were signed, refinancing would be a lot easier. She looked up at me. I didn't know what refinancing meant, so I looked it up. I reached over and took her hand. Grandma. Her voice was very small. Are you going to have to leave your house? No, I said. I'm not. She exhaled. But Lily, I added, none of this is your fault. None of it is your responsibility. You understand that? She nodded, but her eyes were shining. You are 12 years old, I said. You should be thinking about school and your friends and whatever book you're reading this week. Not this. I'm reading 2 books, she said, which was exactly her grandfather's response to that kind of statement. I almost laughed out loud. After she went back to her room, I sat alone for a long time. Then I took the property documents Peter had given me and looked at them again. I read the clauses Gordon had insisted upon. I read them slowly, and I felt something I had not felt in many months. Not exactly strength, more like foundation. The feeling of standing on solid ground. 2 days later, I learned the rest of the story, or enough of it. Lily had mentioned the phone calls, and so the next morning I was awake earlier than usual. The house was quiet. I went downstairs carefully. Callum's voice was coming from the small study off the hallway. Low, but not low enough. I know it's taking longer than we expected. A pause. She's not cooperating the way we thought she would. Another pause. The property is worth considerably more than she realizes. If we can get the refinancing done, it clears the second loan and gives us enough working capital to restart. A pause. Yes, she's healthy, which complicates things. but Ashley says there are other approaches. Ashley. A name I did not recognize. I went back upstairs before he finished the call. That morning I drove to Peter's office again, without telling anyone where I was going. I told Lily I had errands. She looked at me and said, "Okay, Grandma," in a tone that communicated she understood considerably more than okay. I told Peter about the phone call, about the second loan, about the name Ashley. Peter was quiet for a moment, then he pulled out a notepad. "I want to tell you something," he said carefully. "Gordon told me something in confidence, which I am now going to tell you. Because Gordon also told me that if you ever came to me with something like this, the confidence was no longer the priority." I waited. "The year before Gordon died," Peter said, "he discovered that Callum had taken out a significant personal loan, using Gordon and your names as informal guarantors, not legally, but in the documentation submitted to the lender. Gordon was shown the paperwork by the loan officer, who thought Gordon had been formally involved." Peter looked at me. He had not been. Callum had misrepresented the situation. The room felt very still. "Gordon did not confront Callum," Peter continued. "He told me he did not want to destroy the relationship in the time he had left. But he also told me he would not allow the same vulnerability to fall on you." I thought about Gordon in this office, making arrangements quietly, not telling me because he did not want to add weight to what was already unbearable. I thought about the bird feeder, the chickadees, the small notebook with the tally marks. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. "What is the second loan?" I asked. Peter had done some research. The short version: Callum and Diane had invested heavily in a property development venture in the Hamilton area that had significantly underperformed. The debt was substantial. They had been servicing it by other means, but those means were running out. The house on Ridgecrest Drive had been identified. Peter said this carefully, as a possible solution. Not my home. A possible solution. I drove back to Kitchener in the early afternoon. I stopped at Helen's house first. She opened the door, looked at my face and said, "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." I told her what I had learned. Not all of it. Enough. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her cup. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Wait," I said, "and let them show me the rest of it." Helen looked at me for a moment. "Gordon would be proud of you," she said. I told her I wasn't sure about that. He would probably be furious that any of this was necessary. She smiled. "He can be both." The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Callum had invited a woman named Ashley Drummond, who he introduced as a financial planning consultant. She had a briefcase and a pleasant manner, and clearly had not been given the full picture of the situation she was walking into. A man named Gregory Fenn, whom Diane introduced as a mortgage specialist, arrived at the same time. Peter Okafor arrived 12 minutes later, which was the timing we had arranged. We gathered in the living room, the same living room where Gordon had watched the bird feeder, where Lily had opened Christmas presents, where I had, for the past 4 months, felt like a guest in my own home. Callum made a small speech about planning for the future. Diane opened her folder. Ashley Drummond outlined a refinancing proposal that would use the property equity as collateral. Gregory Fenn had documents. Then Callum pushed a package of papers toward me. "These just need your signature, Mum," he said. I did not move to take them. Diane leaned forward. "It's straightforward," I said. "Before we continue, I want to make sure everyone in this room understands the actual legal structure of this property." Callum frowned. "Mum." The front door opened. Peter had a key, which I had given him the previous week. He came in calmly, set his briefcase on the coffee table, and said good afternoon to the room. Ashley Drummond looked confused. Gregory Fenn looked at his papers. Diane's expression went very still, which was more alarming than if she had shown something else. Callum stood. "What is this?" "This," Peter said pleasantly, "is your mother's lawyer, which is what I am and what I have been for 15 years. Please, everyone sit down." Nobody sat immediately, but eventually they did. Peter explained the property structure. He was methodical and clear. He did not use complicated language. He explained that the property could not be refinanced or transferred without my explicit, independent, witnessed consent, and that any document signed under duress or inadequate information would be immediately challengeable. He explained that the power of attorney documents Callum had prepared were, in their current form, inapplicable to property decisions under the existing arrangement. He placed Gordon's original documents on the table. Ashley Drummond read them. She looked at Gregory Fenn. Something passed between them. Then she looked at Callum. And I watched the understanding arrive in her face. The understanding that she had been brought here under false or incomplete pretenses. "Mr. Fenn," she said quietly, "I think we need to review what we've been told about this file." Gregory Fenn did not argue. He put his papers back in his briefcase. Callum looked at me, and for the first time in 4 months, the careful, reasonable mask wasn't quite in place. "Mum," he said, "I was only trying to." "Callum," I kept my voice level. "I know about the loan." The room went very quiet. Diane looked at Callum. It was a sharp, fast look, the kind between two people who have a private language. But, whatever she communicated, it came too late. "I know," I continued, "about the development investment and the debt. I know that you called Peter's office before you moved in, and I know that the purpose of these documents was not to protect me." Callum sat down heavily. He looked, suddenly, very tired. Young in the wrong way, the way people look young when they have been carrying something too heavy and have run out of the energy to pretend otherwise. Diane said nothing. She was looking at the table. Peter stood quietly to one side, giving the room what it needed. Then Lily appeared in the doorway. She had come home from school early. She told me afterward that she had known somehow, that she had felt uneasy all day and asked her teacher if she could call home. She stood in the doorway in her jacket, backpack still on her shoulders, looking at the room full of adults. "Lily," Diane said immediately, "go upstairs." Lily looked at her mother, then at her father, then at me. She came and sat down beside me on the sofa. "I'm staying," she said. Nobody argued with her. I don't think anyone had the energy left to argue with a 12-year-old who had decided where she belonged. Ashley Drummond and Gregory Fenn left shortly afterward. Peter stayed. Helen came over because I had texted her, and she sat in the armchair and said nothing and was exactly the presence the room needed. What followed was not a dramatic scene. It was quieter than that, and harder. Callum talked. He talked about the investment, which had begun as something he genuinely believed in, and had become a disaster by increments. He talked about the debt, which was larger than I had understood. He talked about the months of trying to find a solution, and the way each failed solution had led to a worse one. He talked about Diane's idea, and then his idea, and then the way the ideas had fused into a plan that he had somehow managed to feel was reasonable. "I told myself you'd be more comfortable anyway," he said at one point. "Somewhere smaller, easier to manage." He looked at the table. I knew it wasn't true, but I kept telling myself. Diane sat very still through all of it. When Callum finished, she said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, "I pushed. I want to say that clearly. This was mostly my idea." I looked at her. She looked back. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just don't want Callum to carry this alone." It was, I thought, the most honest thing she had ever said in my presence. Peter collected the documents. Callum and Diane had brought and made notes. He said there would need to be further conversations about the loan situation and Callum's use of Gordon's and my names in original documentation. He said it professionally, without threat, but clearly. After everyone else left, Lily sat beside me on the back porch. It was late afternoon. The yard was very quiet. A chickadee was at the feeder, Gordon's feeder, which I had kept filled every week without fail. "Are you okay?" Lily asked. "Getting there," I said, which was true. She pulled her jacket tighter. "Are they going to have to leave?" I thought about it honestly. "I think we need some time apart, yes. But that doesn't mean permanently." She looked at the chickadee. "I don't want to leave," she said. "I like it here." I put my arm around her. "I know you do. It feels like Grandpa is still here sometimes." "I know," I said. "To me too." Callum and Diane left 10 days later. The decision was Callum's. He came to me on a Tuesday evening, sat at the kitchen table and said, "I think we need to go, Mum. I think staying here right now isn't fair to you." I did not try to change his mind, but I said, "This isn't permanent, Callum. I want you to hear that. This isn't me closing a door." He nodded. His eyes were wet. He did not cry. He has never been comfortable crying in front of me. which is something I have always been a little sorry about. I'm going to fix this, he said, meaning the debt, the choices, all of it. I know you will, I said, because I did believe that, under everything, my son is not a bad person. He is a person who made bad choices under pressure and then let someone with a sharper instinct for opportunity lead him further than he should have gone. These things are not the same as being bad. They are just very expensive lessons. Lily hugged me for a long time before getting in the car. She whispered, "I'll call you every Sunday," which was exactly what her grandfather would have said. She has not missed a single Sunday since. The house on Ridgecrest Drive settled back into its own rhythms. It felt very large for a little while, the way it always does after people leave. I made a habit of sitting on the back porch each evening. I kept the feeder full. I started a small notebook of my own, counting the chickadees. Peter helped me update my estate documents. Everything is clearer now. Unambiguous. Gordon would have approved. Helen and I have dinner together most Thursdays. She says it's because she cooks too much. I say it's because I do the same. We both know it's because we understand each other, which is its own kind of wealth. Callum called on a Sunday, 6 months after he left. The first call he had initiated, he asked how I was. He asked about the garden. He asked if the back step was still holding up, because he had fixed it improperly and felt bad about that. I told him the step was fine. I told him the garden was good. I told him I missed him. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I'm sorry, Mum, for all of it. Not the way I said it before, when I needed you to hear it so you'd cooperate. I mean, actually sorry." I believed him. The difference between those two kinds of sorry is something I have learned to recognize. We talk most Sundays now. He and Diane are working through things. I do not ask for details, because it is their life to manage. I only ask about Lily, and whether they are sleeping enough, and whether there is anything they need that I am in a position to give. Mothers do that, even when they have very good reasons not to, even after everything. One evening near the end of summer, I was sitting on the front porch when the maple tree caught the last light. Gordon had planted it patient and plain-spoken, the way he did everything, knowing he would not live to sit under its full canopy. The tree is taller now than he ever saw it. The shade it casts in the late afternoon reaches almost to the sidewalk. I sat under it and thought about what this past year had cost me, and what it had given me, and which of those things mattered more. What I came to was this. The house on Ridgecrest Drive was never the point. Gordon did not spend 31 years protecting a piece of property. He spent 31 years protecting a person. The house was simply the form his protection took, something solid and legal and impossible to argue with, because he understood that some arguments would come when he was no longer there to make them himself. When Callum said the house belonged to all of them now, he thought he was taking something from me. He wasn't, because the house belongs to the person who builds a life inside it, who keeps the feeder filled and the step repaired, and the curtains hung exactly as she likes them, who remembers every birthday and every sacrifice and every evening sitting in the driveway working up the courage to go inside. That person is me. That will always be me. And every day I sit on this porch under this tree, I know that what Gordon left me was not a property or a document or a legal arrangement, though all of those things mattered. What he left me was the knowledge that I was worth protecting, and that turned out to be the only thing I ever really needed to know.